Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Good morning to this morning session. I'm excited about this conversation about managing family wealth and in particular reputation in this changing world. And we have a very, I would say, rich and diverse panel here today. So many perspectives to bring into the conversation. And I'm going to get started by briefly introducing myself. I am Marina Cvetkovic. I'm an executive coach. I work with senior leaders to help them create a better tomorrow through their organizations. And I have here with me Majed, I have Britta, I have Nick and Eric, and I'm going to let them briefly introduce themselves. And then we'll get started. Majed, you want to start?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Majid Sherbini. I'm the CEO of Sherbini Group of Companies. I'm from Saudi Arabia, and our family business has been more than 45 years, and we are mainly in the energy sector, real estate, as well as luxury services.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Britta Pfister. I'm a tax lawyer by formation, and I work with families on family business succession and family governance planning now.
Welcome, Britta.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nick Loughran. I'm the co-founder of an organization called Integra, and we're a communications, reputation, and social impact consultancy. And we work with a number of family officers and high net worth individuals, as well as business leaders, primarily in the UK, but also around the world.
Thank you.
Good morning, Erin. Eric Martineau Fortens. I'm a reform investment banker that transformed a modest family office into an institutional investor. We do venture capital and growth equity, a bit short of 1.5 billion under management across Atlantic, based between Guernsey and Switzerland, and managing LPs from various countries, various typology, and one of them being PFR Ventures. So we're very pleased to be welcomed.
Welcome everyone. So I'm going to kick us off by, there's so much to dive into today and too little time, but the one topic that I'm particularly curious about is often when we think of family wealth and we think of family businesses, we think tradition. And at the same time, we're here in Davos, right? It's all about innovation. And I think a lot of you sit at that intersection, right? And a lot of your work, I guess, day to day entails kind of managing the two and finding the balance. So, what have you seen in the space of, managing family wealth and family businesses in terms of successfully navigating the two? What have been some of the lessons learned, takeaways, insights that you've had from doing this work? Whoever wants to go first, yeah.
I'm happy to start briefly on this. I think the core element when you start is to establish the core value of what your family and what the group you represent want to do. And I think if you establish that base, I think that's a very important one. And that might involve certain sectors, certain countries, certain things that you're not believing in or that you believe more in. So I think it's very important to establish that. And that require either a patriarch that will set the tone or many of the constituent of that family office to agree together and put in place dispute resolution mechanism and various things that I think are important for any companies to operate well. I think that's, to me, the core thing to start with. And then the rest is pretty mechanical from my standpoint. But I think that's very important to establish that.
If I can build
Yes,
on that,
please.
fully agree. And in terms of the values, what I've found is that the more you can make those values explicit and not assume and not just, the patriarch may be setting the strategy, but if that's not communicated and made explicit, there's going to be a problem at some stage. So what you want to do is start your dialogue early, revisit, does that work for the next generation or, for other stakeholders as well, and then build from there. So openness, explicitness, and communication, I add that to the values finding.
Love that, and I'm going to dive into that in a second. But first, I want to hear from yes.
Yeah, I think extremely valid points regarding the values being established and explicit. I think the biggest issue also for a second generation like myself is taking over from the patriarch, my father. And with that, of course, me being from a different generation, different education, different background, and trying still to adhere to the values that has been set by my father, the patriarch, and continuing to, of course, infuse innovation into our business. This is the real challenge, and I think this is for me where it comes to on my shoulders to create that balance between adhering to the wisdom and the values of the family, as well as trying to get that innovation kicked in the business, because time have changed, environment have changed, the entire business landscape have changed. So we need to become more innovative, but also at the same time keeping those values closer to our objectives. And definitely to Eric's point, I think once you have those values, values should not change. You should adapt to those values in your innovation strategy. And this is where the key success of still, having the innovation while keeping the tradition.
That's a really interesting point. Thank you for saying that. Yes, Nick.
Yeah, and to build on all these points, I think the values piece is so important. And I also think though that there's a sort of connotation of family wealth, of family offices, and that they're traditional and they're perhaps a bit slow. And that's really not the case in most instances. And Majed is testament to that. Some very successful family businesses, some of the world's largest businesses are ultimately family businesses. I work with people who are sort of third, fourth, fifth generation, but even actually 12th generation. And these organizations, family offices and the businesses, they've been successful over a very long time because they're able to take that long-term view. But at every step of the way, they're thinking about innovation. They're thinking about how do we sort of maintain relevance with the current business climate, operational climate, etc. And just as Majed was saying, we assume that this is the first time that we have to be innovative. That's been happening for decades, if not centuries. It's just our version of it. And I think the most important point is you have to adapt, like any business, any wealth holder, to the climate around you. So that long-term view with the ability to bake in the innovation is, I think, what really sets family businesses and families apart in terms of their success.
Thank you. And sticking with values for a second, because obviously I can feel that you all align that this is such an important element of and key to success, really. You mentioned kind of a few different perspectives. Rita, you mentioned it's important that they're explicit, right? Let's we need to have them clear. Majed, you mentioned they need to stay the same. We're adapting how we're applying them and what that means, but the values need to stay the same. And then there is the patriarch element of it, that you mentioned, Eric. And I'm wondering, what does this look like? Just for me and the audience, in your experience, what have been some of the lessons learned in going about establishing those values? And also we mentioned revisiting or re-looking at them, taking a fresh look from the next generation. And we'll talk about next generation in a second. What does this look like? Is it really that the patriarch comes and says, this is the values we're going to stand for? Is it a conversation? Have you seen different modalities where a family actually gets together and they discuss or rediscuss? Tell us a little bit more kind of behind the curtain, what this kind of concretely looks like.
Okay, I'll start on
Yes.
this. Basically, I was lucky enough to, let's say, start, my career alongside my father, and for me, this journey have taught me a lot. And, as we are working, we could see those values. We live those values. We're talking about, for example, my father, appreciates a lot the human element. He loves to support his employees and their families. So for him, this is priority number one and value number one. Commitment to the customers or to the clients. Yeah. This is again, something concrete. So when you think about it, this is what he established the company for. He's not, when it's a family business, he wants to make it surely a family business, and everyone wants to be brought to the family. So even as we grow, we went from, few tens of employees to hundreds of employees. Those values does not change. And we have them in our core values. We display them on our website and all of our marketing elements because we're proud of them. And I think this is what makes us different than a lot of other companies. And now when it comes to practice, yes, regarding the family, we do have regular, meetings where we discuss, where we need to say, okay, you know what, now we are shifting our strategy because, whatever we used to apply before is no longer valid in the same way. We need to change our way of applying the same aspect. So you just have to adapt. You have to be flexible enough. You definitely plan, you stick to your plan, but also you have to revisit constantly and make sure you correct course as you move on.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think not just family business, but all the companies have to
Yes,
do,
yes, absolutely. I was going to say it's no different, but it seems like focus on people has paid off, right? So it continues to be,
absolutely.
But I was going to say sorry, maybe you wanted to go on. I was going to say that that's very similar to the way we apply it to business. I mean, in our case, we're a college of partners. It was my firm, but I've sort of opened up the capital to a lot of other team members. I have voting control, but from the economical share, it's all split among the partner, with me having maybe the larger share, but it's done in a way that will be a long-term vehicle. But we sit down every 6 months to review our mission, to review our value. We hired consultant, we hired people around so that it is distanced from what I wanted to do initially, to make sure that this is something that a college of partners and associated to a family are really behind the same vision of what they want to build. And at the level above, which is my small, humble family office, I mean, I did the same thing with my daughters. I mean, from 12, 13 years old, they started working on building the logo of the family office. They started being educated about discretion required to that. And I think you need to do this from the get-go to make sure that they understand the people around you, should it be family member, team member, what's the ambition, and you set the tone this way.
How old
but
are
you
the-
need to be really open to listening to their ambition and what they want to do.
Oh, I'll come back to that in a second. I want to hear other
Doesn't mean
perspectives.
accepting everything.
Yes,
That's
yes.
a different story. Yeah.
How old are they now, Eric? Is it
Mine are 15 and 12.
okay? So they're starting to have their own point of view. All right, Brita.
I think it's really encouraging and great to hear when things are working well, which seems to be the case. There seems to be that dance between tradition and innovation in your case. Often we meet with families where that's not necessarily the case, where we have a strong founder personality who thinks, well, this is my way or the highway, and the next one. And this is where the interesting bits come in, I think, and where it's important to moderate that correctly.
Yeah.
And we're saying a little bit earlier, start early, bring these things out. Often, in my experience, it actually starts with the next generation saying, well, something isn't working. And before we really turn away from the situation, let's try and bring it together. And I think this is then we're in a situation that isn't as lending itself to the proper dance. Then you bring in a structure and dialogue. And ideally, you'd start with establishing some values that are open enough to accommodate the innovation. I have a very interesting one at the moment. I find privacy and confidentiality attitudes are very much changing. If we look at 20 years ago, we don't want to do, we want to be extremely private. We don't want anyone to know. That isn't even possible at this day and age, and it will come and bite you at some stage. So you better find a strategy and communication around this as well. And this is one of the examples. And I think the more you work this out in a dialogue, and you ask for methods, I found very helpful to work with the next generation to make suggestions for the first of whoever the owning generation is at the moment, to say, that sounds good. We don't like, so, but put the initiative with the younger generation. I found that very, very powerful as a method.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a communications professional, I'd always advocate for more. I'd always advocate for more communications, in between generations of family or otherwise. I think an obvious point, but no family is the same, right? And every family has a different dynamic. They have, it's not a linear issue either. I mean, it might be in terms of succession planning, but in terms of other interests and you know, some families are really broad in that respect. And also it depends on the sort of age and stage, and you know, there's so many different. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture of how different individual cases can be. Yeah, I think it was Shakespeare that talked about the 7 stages of man. I mean, it depends on when are you going to have these conversations, and at what stage are the people that you're talking to, whether the principals or the next gen, at. But crucially, what are their interests? So if you're going to have a conversation, yes, absolutely about values. I think we've all agreed on that. But also, what are the interests? And let's sort of hear about where they feel they can generate more impact, perhaps slight change, or continue in a very successful manner that already exists. It's not always about change. It's about reviewing. It's about listening and learning. And then as a family, perhaps, or as a business, taking on board how can we take this forward and be more successful? So whether that's, you know, do they have an interest in certain investments? Do they have an interest in social impact and philanthropy? Do they have an interest in a certain market? I think one area that I could say rather broadly, despite having just said every family is different, most of the time, next generation are obviously a little bit more interested and clued up on the reputation side, which I know we're going to talk about. But I think that's where they start to bring a little bit more innovative thinking in terms of, you know, brand positioning, just being cognizant and aware of how that can affect the bottom line of the family business.
So we'll get to the reputation and confidentiality privacy in a second. Before we go there, I want to talk about this sort of cross-generational dialogue, because we had a chat over coffee this morning about that, and I think it's a very interesting one. So from the perspective of, again, we're here in Davos, longevity and sustainability of family businesses, you know, historically, right, it used to be the case that that meant that, you know, the next generation needs to keep doing what the previous generation did, and more that is not really viable anymore, because we know that, you know, generations are awakening and they're saying, hey, I want to do other things with my life. So, you know, what have you seen in that space in terms of like how to navigate that complexity? And also, what alternative modalities, I guess, are emerging for ensuring the business continues, despite the fact that perhaps not everyone, or perhaps no one in the next generation, wants to be actively involved in the business or family wealth management. So, whoever wants to start.
It's a complex question, because I mean, between what you said about what the new generation want to do and also your duty and your obligation, like probably in your case of continuing what has been built, and you're not 7th generation yet, so you need to still consolidate it. It's a complex journey. But some model I've seen, and I know you know Rachab, and I'm not going to talk about this one. In the Philippines, there's a very large family that we know fairly well. They are 5th generation. And a lot of capable people in the family, but not everyone having the interest in it. And they have a very interesting model, is that every 20 years, they select a group of 11 to 12 of the family that are put into the business, and they compete up until they are 60 years old. And at 60 years old, it's mandatory obligation to retire for the CEO. And this is how they've been making sure that it goes across generation. That's a firm that is 150 years. Now, it allows to make sure that you have this continuity into the family in terms of the core business, which is a diversified holding in this case. But at the same time, it allows other people that are not necessarily feeling the passion or that eagerness to do it, to do other stuff. And then they get involved into other business and so forth. So that's the perfect model when it worked, but that's something I found extremely interesting that I've seen recently.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the key elements that any family should keep in mind is that the necessity to educate the 2nd generation. I mean, the next generation. I would say it could be 3rd, could be 4th.
Yes.
And from an early age. And in my honest opinion, you know, you educate them, you give them the skills to excel. And once they are at the right age, if they have the desire to join the business, then that'll be great. If not, they still would be a good advisors for you, your business. And I think this is very essential to keep that in mind, because most of the families, and at least maybe speaking about my part of the world, is that they don't want to involve people, especially their, the kids, the nephews, or whatever, and from an early age, and they think that, oh, okay, once they grow up, once they get educated, they will join. And I think it's slightly, not the right strategy,
Yes.
in my honest opinion.
Yes.
The more they're informed, the more they're aware, the more they understand, because for a patriarch, what he wants to leave is not actually the wealth. What he wants to leave is the legacy. And this is where the second or third or fourth generation should focus on, is to continue that legacy, to preserve that legacy and move forward. Regardless of how much you want to diversify, regardless of how much you want to invest in, I don't know, crypto or whatever you want, still you have to keep that legacy right in front of your eyes. And this is the keys to successful succession and continuation and sustainability for the family business.
And I think, Majid, just one quick comment here. I think making sure the next generation, the children, are taught financial literacy. They can do whatever they want in life, be an artist, be an actor, be an entrepreneur. But financial literacy from a very young age is something that you cannot afford not transmitting when you are running other people's money or your own money.
Exactly. I was going to say it applies to everyone, right? And ideally,
education at the moment is not doing this. You look at school in the UK, in the US, and so forth. Economy class are not part of the core curriculum. People don't know what is a mortgage at 14, 15 years old. And except if your parents taught you this, you will not know it. And that's something that is very important to take ownership of and not expect others to do it for you and your family.
Thank you.
Just a couple of examples. Yes, I mean, just on that point, where in my work, I've seen that work well is sort of managing small portfolios around social impact and philanthropic capital. I don't know if this is something that's happened, but from a sort of relatively early age, it brings in their sort of next generation's ideas, interests, moving forward on the ESG topics, and they've got money to invest, and they've got money to manage, and they sort of start to learn that way. So, I mean, that's just one example, but I think it's a relatively well-trodden path and a quite successful way to do it. In terms of how else, in terms of the structure of businesses, these guys are much better to talk about that than me. But, I think Majid's point is a really important one. You don't have to be the sole sort of CEO, person running the show. You can have trustees, executive trustees, but having that familial interest and also insight and guidance constantly, I think, is important, because otherwise you do lose the family legacy. Otherwise,
maybe just a short point, and agreeing on what Majid was saying. What I heard is that there's a choice. There's a choice for the next generation to come in or not. And it's always surprising, I find, when we start working with wealth owners or business owners, how do we make sure we bring them in? You make sure by opening it up, giving choices, and hence you have a chance to keep it together with the educational point. So this seems to be clearly something that's working. It's really nice.
Yes, and also what I'm hearing is kind of like the common theme of, like, Majid, what you were saying is like it's a choice, and also because you're educating them, because you're sort of lifting that curtain or opening the door, they can make a more informed choice by the time, it's time to make that decision. And then I think, Nick, your example of like giving them part of a small portfolio or charity or something to manage, again, is an even more informed choice, because now they get a taste of what it looks like to be doing that, right? And so, it's really a win-win. And if by that time they decide that it's a no, well, then it really is a no, right?
100%. And I think, just trying to put a little bit of kind of flavor into the discussion, in our part of the world, with so many, traditions and heritage in the family business, we kind of try to enforce these traditions in the wrong way. Meaning, I've seen so many family businesses in our part of the world where they say, oh, okay, my eldest son is going to be the next CEO, or my, it has to be a boy, or it has to be, no. These are not valid. These are not the criteria for the continuation of the family business, But unfortunately, these were the cases. And, I think in our part of the world, we have one of the highest failure rates in family businesses, because I think more than half of the family businesses don't even, continue after the second generation, which is exactly for that reason. While maybe in other parts of the world where they have better practices, better governance, implemented or embedded in the actual roots of the family business, have managed to continue to the third or fourth and fifth generation. So these are the part of the aspects that we have to always keep in mind. And you can only know who is the right successor if you involve them early enough. You would see the passion, you would know the drive, you would see the actual interest or not. And for me, this is where you would make the selection. Yes, you as a patriarch could eventually, have the ultimate saying in selecting who's the successor, but in general, you would have indications, and of course, you would have criteria to do that.
And Majid is so right. And sometimes it jumps a generation. Sometimes this is the third generation that is ready, and you have an intermediary CEO that is running the business while others are focusing on pure investment and diversification. But I think that's very important that you put the right person in place, and it's okay if it's not the family member for 5 to 10 years.
Correct.
I mean, I think it should be okay.
Coming back to the topic, excellent, really, really, I think very insightful in terms of different ways to manage. As again, it's super complex. There's no one, I think, formula for success, but at least, some key lessons learned so far. Coming back to the topic of reputation, transparency, privacy, confidentiality, coupled with, I guess, the next generation or the new generation desire for more transparency and also authenticity, right? It's like these days, I mean, I work with CEOs a lot, and one of the things that we've seen is you cannot hide your private life anymore. It doesn't work if you're the CEO. People want to know what you do in your private life so that they know if they can trust you. If what you show in the workplace is truly authentic, or if you're actually, just kind of doing a show, right? In terms of what you value, where you put your, and that I believe will continue to be the case more and more down the organization. We're seeing that now with the whole C-suite slowly emerging, that we need them. People want to see them in the spotlight more. They want to know, hey, what do you care about? What charity do you invest in? Where do you spend your weekends? How are you, whatever, managing your, and so coming back to the family office and family wealth perspective, I think is a really interesting one, because obviously historically it's been something that is very private, that, we tend to think that the more private we keep it, the more we're protecting it. So how is that evolving? What have you seen over the past, I want to say 5 years, because I know that past 5 years have been a massive shift in terms of social media and all of that. And PR. I know, Nick, you must have a point of view on this, but whoever wants to start.
I'm happy to. Well, I think you've covered pretty much all of the key issues, but I think it's important to know what's been driving that, so then you can work out how do you handle it and what's best for you, your family, and your family business. You're right. We've seen a real change in the sort of communications landscape, if you like, media landscape over the last 5, 10, maybe a bit more years. For this drive really for transparency, which has led to sort of people wanting to show themselves as being authentic. I'm not saying more authentic, just showing themselves authentic, because hopefully people are authentic. They just haven't necessarily shown that before. And I think a lot of this has been driven by a real breakdown in trust across, so many different broad spectrums of society, but mainly a lack of trust in institution, whether that's political, perhaps business, religion, you name it. There's been scandals over the last 10, 20 years. And this real drive, it's really driven this lack of trust in that, which I think in then sort of wealth holders are being brought into that as well. People just, there's a lack of trust in general. What that has led to is a sort of rise in obviously populism, as we know, but also activism and a demand for change in terms of people in positions of power and responsibility, whether you're, not just an institution of power, but actually a wealth holder. People in those positions of power and responsibility doing good with that. And so, of course, we're here in Davos. We know all about conscious capitalism and etc. So I think this sort of lack of trust, which is obviously being compounded by a massive growth in misinformation and disinformation recently spread by, various social media outlets, has led people to sort of be not forced, but there's been a groundswell of opinion, I think, for people in power to be more transparent, be more accountable, be more authentic. And then the sort of impact on the communications piece here is that that's an opportunity to start telling your story, being a bit more open, as you were mentioning. And it's not just an opportunity lost if you don't do it. The risk is clearly that other people will do that for you. The black hole of information will be filled by social media, by other people's assumptions. And so I think, leaders across all sectors, especially next gen leaders, understand that. They've also grown up being, more open with their lives on social media or perhaps just in general. Final point before I hand over. I think there is an interest in people's personal lives. I don't think that has to be you don't have to use, you don't have to open that, Pandora's box, so long as you are giving some kind of story, as long as you're showing some kind of, openness about what you do, how you're doing it, how you're generating greater impact, how that's relevant. And I think that's the other point. Relevance is key here. How is what you're doing as a family, actually creating a greater impact and therefore being relevant to a wider group of stakeholders. So long story short, a lack of trust has driven this sort of real interest and demand for accountability and transparency, which has led people to realize that being a bit more open and authentic actually is going to get you a long way.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think I would maybe use three things, not the last 5 years. Let's say we go 15 years.
Yeah.
To me, there's this three core thing that changed because of social media and because of the exposure that we now are not able to avoid. I like to call it the 2009-10, where tax optimization became tax evasion.
Yeah.
That was the first element that really transformed things. The second thing is the Me Too movement. 2017-18, when suddenly it became mandatory to really almost like fire competent people that were men to replace them by women. It became really, really bad, and you had no choice. And the third one has been the climate one, and which is all very important points, but it led to a complete change on your communication, a mandatory obligation to be assisted by competent people to communicate well, because you can be shut down from certain market just because you're not addressing it. It doesn't mean that addressing it, you resolve it, but just not addressing it is a big issue. And that has been a big change for families and also for large businesses. Now, what I find interesting, and I'm saying this as someone that lived in Guernsey for 15 years, so trust me, I've been exposed to a bunch of things there. But the interesting thing now is that with the new administration that just came into place in the US, a number of all of these elements might change, not go back to where they were, but now we're entering a world of extreme competition across countries. Profit, success will be defined not necessarily by these different elements now. At least it seems. I mean, it's only 24 hours since when, but it will be very interesting to see how people adjust to this, because as much as we do a lot of ESG, a lot of DEI, there's Article 9 fund in Europe and all of these different elements. I mean, if you arrive with a deck to fundraise that has been structured for Europe in the US, you're not even entering the United States at the moment with the ESG element that are so important, so core. But the world is changing. And at the end of the day, we were having this conversation. When you're managing other people's money or your family money, you can distribute and create foundations, but you can do it with the profit you make. And I think if you don't do it with that state of mind, that becomes very difficult. And I think this is where we're all going to have to adjust a bit the way we, probably not the communication, but probably what is behind. But that's a very, very interesting time that we're living now. And I don't have the answer to it. I think it's at this stage.
I don't want to hog the mic, but I think you're absolutely right. I mean, reputation is not just nice to have. It's critical. I would say this, wouldn't I? But it is absolutely critical to business success, growth, individual success. But you've got to know who it's relevant to and why. Why are you communicating to them, and what are you showing? So if your core market is the US, you've got to be wary of what's happening in the landscape. If not, it's not a one size fits all, I think, to the point. But yes, absolutely. It's going to be an interesting next 4 years, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
and what I'm hearing, sorry, Bridget, before you go there, is like more intentionality in controlling your narrative, right? On,
Yes, perfect. It's exactly where I was going, and it just coming back on your point on telling your story, telling the family stories, and then turning inwards. There is the family. If you have the founder, the founding couple, that story may be simple. Then the next generation comes in with a few kids and perhaps also second families. The story may not necessarily be the same. And if you're in the cousin generation, the third one, it becomes even more complicated. So I think what's, again, process and governance important in the sense of finding and collaborating on that particular narrative to avoid having an Abigail Disney scenario in the worst case, and really bringing that together and also seeing where is your individual interaction with social media and where is that of the family, where is the problem, and how do we align on that. And there's mechanisms. It's just, again, something, consciousness creation. But I just think the internal element as families grow in numbers is crucial.
I think, my colleagues have mentioned a lot of valid points, but from a very practical
Yes.
aspect, at least from what we have done, because we are operational in almost 15 countries, and we have to keep our communication sort of streamlined and precise, and also culturally, let's say, aware when we are making our communication, because I think what I communicate in Hungary or in Lithuania, the US, is totally different.
Yeah.
The message should remain the same, but the way I communicate, the way I propose my ideas or my insights should be culturally conscious. I think this is very important. Second, I'm a millennial, so I've witnessed life before social media and connectivity and now. And I'm trying to create that balance. I'm trying to bridge my father is still involved in the business. He's a chairman, but for him, he doesn't understand whatsoever what we're trying to do in digital marketing or in communication. For him, he is from the generation who wants to be discreet, who wants to be very closed in the information that we make public. And of course, I have to create the balance between the information that we make public and at the same time, not to disturb the peace, and have him go to sleep as well. So, yeah, it's a tough job nowadays. I think my job as CEO, I think at least 20-30% is about communication.
Oh,
and it matters a lot. It matters a lot.
And there's a lot of merit to the discretion of the previous generation. I think when you build business, revealing your entire business plan to the world in order to be open and communicate, it's not smart from a negotiation standpoint. But you need to strike the right balance. And I think it's so important to be supported by advisors in this. I have a LinkedIn profile. We have all the different tools that exist, but we have a team of people managing it.
Yeah.
There's not a single thing I will hit the button on that is not reviewed, making sure that it addresses our mission, our values, and we do it in a smart way, because that's the new communication tools. And that's the same thing for my kids. They're all on TikTok, Instagram. You need to teach them from a young age the impact it might have on their future, being accepted at universities, being accepted in jobs. Any young people we're recruiting, we have our team reviewing their entirety of Instagram, TikTok since they're 12, 13 years old. Yeah. And based on that, you make an assessment on the people and you ask questions. So you're from a very young age, you're super exposed, and you need to be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it goes both ways, right? It's like there's an opportunity, again, to create a story, a compelling story, an interesting story, but like how do you, educate also them to use it in the right direction, right? And really as a tool. And I think, Nick, you pointed to that, but I agree with you, Eric. It's so important to have advisors, to have a team. And back to your point, Majid, it is becoming an increasing part of the CEO's role, and I see that in my work, and I believe that trend will continue, because, you are the face of the organization at the end of the day, no?
Absolutely, and I think, from our business and our industry, it requires that. You know, again, it's not about trying to be a shining star, but it's more about sharing success stories, sharing wisdom, trying to, you know, position yourself not just as CEO, but also as a thought leader.
Yes.
And this is all part of your, I'd say, job description as a CEO now.
Yes.
It changed a lot. And of course, I'm still learning, you know, and there's a long way to go. And as we look into, you know, the constant changes around us in terms of communication and the speed of communication, I think we should even, you know, be more and more aware, as well as not try to make it over rigid in terms of putting policies and governance, but also at the same time, you know, to be responsible, to be, you know, self-aware on the messages that we are delivering to the public. And I think this is something that it's very tough to create that balance. And, you know, if you don't mind, just to give a quick example, but, you know, when COVID hits, I doubt any CEO have managed to put a plan during COVID. We went from wearing masks and keeping 2-meter distance to complete isolation in just a couple of months. So how would you be able to keep employees engaged? How can you keep them aware of the situation? Everyone was scared. Everyone was terrified to lose their job, to you know, cut their maybe pay or whatever. Different government subsidies was introduced for you know, helping companies to you know, navigate this situation. But it's all about you as a CEO, what you would communicate. How would you actually ensure that whether the situation will end in 1 month or 1 year, how you would come out of it victorious. And I think this is where a real challenge for all of the CEOs and family businesses that went through that period. And I think, you know, this is where communication have played a major role. I think more than 50-70% of the job was done through communication.
It was almost only that, and you know, crisis management in the background, right? When you were not communicating. But I love what you said, Majid, around when you take the spotlight, you don't do it for you. And this is a conversation I often have with the CEOs and C-suite, is because they say, but I don't, you know, I like to be the leader, you know, kind of in the second row. I want my team to be in the spotlight. And all of that is great. And at the same time, we need CEOs to take the spotlight, not from egoistic point of view, but it's because your people need you to do that. When you do that, you elevate the mission. When you do that, right? So it serves them. And it's interesting because when I speak with the employees, they say, no, I want my leader to have an even higher profile and visibility. They deserve it. And it would help me. It would help us. And so I completely agree. I think it's becoming more and more part of a CEO job description. And we more and more we expect, and I think, Nick, you see this probably in your world, and Eric, I think you do this beautifully from what I've seen on your profiles. It's like we expect the leaders and CEOs to be thought leaders these days. It's not enough to just lead a business, because thought leadership tells us that, hey, you care beyond the 4 walls of your organization. You're actually thinking about how what you're doing connects to the ecosystem. And you know, longer term perspective, rather than just I'm making sure I'm making profit and running a business, which used to be enough. It's not enough anymore.
But it can also help. It can help you make profit and run a business successfully. So I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think you know, look at the world's best leaders decades over throughout history. Communications has been probably one of the core skills that they need. So yeah, sounds like you're doing a great job.
Absolutely. Eric, Nick, Britta, Majid, thank you so much. Thanks for this conversation.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much for having us.